So to introduce what I wanted to talk about, I'm going to be talking through um, different parts of my practice, such as some of my focus is parasites, like completely, mostly about parasites, and its relationship to people. Uh, Now it's moving into kind of music as well, but looking at migration, but it's mostly kind of text-based and text, sound, and sculpture. So I think I'll share my screen. Okay, I think you should be able to see that.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. This. Okay, so what I want to talk about is parasites, scientists, uh, predominantly biologists. I don't mind physics or chemists, but not my thing. Um, Insect musicians, performers, labs, value, and the body's a site of study. So I'm going to talk through a few different approaches. Jess and Elodie were talking about how we're saying that everyone's going to be going to Fez soon. So this is kind of maybe some methods or methodology to kind of consider. Um, that I'm going to talk through kind of quite slow process as well, which is treating this body as a site of study. Although it doesn't sound like it right now. But yeah, so I predominantly focus on artists and scientists within the work and what I'm going to be showing you. I think the collaboration I want to talk about are predominantly between artists and scientists, more so biologists or people that work with health or the body. Um, so I'm not going to read this quote out, but I'll just leave it on there for a few minutes. Try and save my voice a bit. I'll read maybe a few parts of that because I know everyone reads at different speeds anyway. So if I can go back. So this is looking at how to shape a productive scientist-artist collaboration. Um, there's a lot of expectation when you're thinking about collaboration with another discipline, or there's a certain kind of hierarchy as well with how that's understood. So it can be seen as scientists are higher or more favorable because they have more knowledge, but that's not necessarily true. And especially thinking about collaboration and different disciplines. This could be, I think, if your focus is on technology, then or instruments or tools, there's a certain kind of discussion to have between both of those where the collaboration can be quite mutually beneficial. Um, and this kind of mutual respect is crucial. So I wanted to really highlight that as something that I find really important as part of working with labs or scientists, because I am an artist, but I just have a lot of knowledge on parasites now. But to start off with it, when you're starting a new project, and when I first started this kind of area of study, I didn't really know much about it. So there's nothing wrong with asking lots of questions, and having this kind of reciprocal interaction with someone or a group of people. And that this is part of this is that scientists are often surprised by how interactions with artists can shift their perspective on their research. So that is also really key. So it's important to see the value in your position and your experience with who you're going to be collaborating with. And that can be for a long period of time or it could be over a few instances. Text is really important. So this is a really early work based on 2 years of MA research. It's a manifesto that was put together through um, hundreds of documents, reading and visiting labs and speaking to certain scientists and getting to a point where there's this kind of way of thinking or way of behaving, which is understood as socioparasitology. And that is the kind of, this kind of socio-cultural aspect of parasites and how they inhabit and how people are understood as parasites or seen in that way. But the pure basis of this is to think about this in terms of the positive, that interruptions, thinking about like the undercommons or Deleuze, all those kinds of like important schools of thought and maybe the Frankfurt School of Thought as well, all these kind of really important ways of thinking. Um, how to interrupt is positive, and the kind of the parallel to this is thinking about how transmigration is beneficial. So there's positive aspects of parasites with migration, and that's what this is really closely linked to. But this is kind of after, so this is might seem quite like a small document, which it is, but this is based off of lots of really important research that has influenced a lot of other work that I've made. Um, so that's just the manifesto in the Netherlands, as part of like a larger library. Part of this work and this kind of the methodology of this is making work that has a conversation around it. So part of this, so this was at a neuroscience residency that I did, and it was really important to bring this earlier work into this environment and to kind of carry that thread through with a different perspective. So I wasn't just focusing on um, clinical parasitologists, I was focusing on neuroscientists or social neuroscientists, and that was really key to get a different angle on what one piece of work. And so all of this work kind of came out from that residency. Um, so I'll carry on. So reoccurring language that comes up in the work. This is something that you might find as well as you're kind of writing notes and kind of rereading what you've written and spending some kind of time kind of actively writing about maybe like a visit or a conversation that you might have had. There's certain kind of, you might notice that there's certain words or key phrases that are really kind of important and hook you back into what you're thinking through. And this is like quite a good exercise, I think, to do. Yeah, but there's so many kind of slight things that happen um, that are really important for what you want to make and how you want to kind of progress the project or things like that, really. So this is a piece of work. So it's a carpet piece. It was about 4 by 5 meters. Um, what you can see on there are a series of diagrams and drawings that were taken from observations, visits, kind of conversations I had, things I'd seen, all thinking through again this the interactions between parasites and this running kind of motif or this kind of gesture with color and how that kind of describes different kind of interactions. Um, so it's part of the methodology is thinking through color as like a control kind of aspect of this. And the kind of the motif of the spring or the kind of the physical interruption and how that manifests. So this is also, I think this was about 3 months to make this piece of work. It was quite like a daily 3 months to make this piece of work. And it was based on all those kind of really quick sketches that I'd done that don't look like this because it's quite finished, but yeah, so kind of like that. So to carry on, there was so what I find really important is to go back to this piece of text. I needed to see if this manifesto would actually make sense or if it was completely speculative. even though it is a polemic piece of text, so it's, emotionally charged, direct, all of that. Um, I wanted to see if I could test it out. So I got a big grant to work on an exhibition at Nunnery Gallery in Bow, which is in London. And I wanted to really test out the manifesto, and I gave it to 10 artists to create work from. And I had some doctors from Greece, someone working with leech farming, some PhD researchers from Oxford. I had a textiles, someone who's working with textiles, and then there were a series of kind of workshops within this. Um, oh, sorry. And there were a series of workshops and things around this because I really needed to test this small document that I had made with others and with artists and doctors, things like that, to see if that kind of made sense. And it was a really good outcome, I think. It's a good way, I think, to test your writing, if it is a kind of model of thinking or something that is quite directional. So here's a slide from a lecture that I did. Okay, so I want to talk about migrant testing, which was a piece of work where it was another performance lecture, which is what the kind of common theme is with some of the work. Um, what I wanted to highlight with this work, it's called Migrant Testing, was based on a series of conversations that I had with a specific clinical parasitologist who I decided not to work with. Um, and my work itself was my kind of ongoing conversation or um, maybe kind of this kind of argument that I had with myself in terms of value and this kind of like moral compass of her work, really. I was asked to read loads of database kind of articles and things that she'd written and papers, and before even being able to kind of work with her. But I noticed that a lot of the methods seemed quite like testing for parasites, for example, seemed quite yeah, unethical, really. And that's what turned into this work. So there may be points where you think that the person that you want to work with is the only person that you can work with because you're short on time, but it's not true. There's something about the conversation that has gone badly, which is also the work. So that's kind of what I want to talk about with this. Um, okay, so now we're going to be looking at sound as parasite speakers and public address systems. So this is thinking more about the physicality of sound, or sound as metaphor, or parasite as a metaphor, and how objects and the identity of the speaker is really important to thinking about how, within the work, that is also part of the work as well. So it's not just deciding I'm going to put up gallery standard speakers in a space and think that is fine. There's more to that. There's all this kind of history of technology, which is really key. And that's something that I found has been really essential, especially thinking about where public address speakers systems live and whose voice is said through them, um, and the role that they play in kind of public environments and different locations such as I'll go through these ones. So, different locations such as uh, factory car parks, in labs, in hallways, in kind of research buildings, kind of airports, churches, all these different kind of places where public address systems live, and I find that really important for my work. Um, and so this is just an example of my solo in Porto a couple of years ago. And what you can see are two speakers that have been edited, and it's like a physical manifestation of a parasite or kind of a coupling of parasites. And what is said through those speakers is an interview that I did with Professor Robert Paulson, who wrote the book Evolutionary Ecology of Parasites, and he's based in New Zealand. So my conversation with him, this kind of Q&A sort of interaction, was asking him about parasites that he's familiar with, and this thing around public health and what happens to our immune systems and the need for this. So this is just kind of one small intervention of looking at how I've recontextualized this public address speaker, or this kind of sound projector, which is what this actually is. Um, there's things like horn speakers, public, sound projectors, um, there's ceiling speakers, all of that. So there's lots of kind of speakers that I find that are embedded and carry a certain narrative and this kind of dominance with kind of control and direction and instruction. So that's kind of really part of the work. Another image of the work from outside. Okay, so this was a Q&A that I had between both sets of speakers. This was another room within the show, and this was quite confrontational, and I needed it to be quite confrontational within the space. There's this kind of ongoing conversation around the narrative around what parasites are and what migrants are spoken are described as. So this room is quite confrontational, and I was looking at fleas for this one for topical parasites. It's kind of I was looking at how the idea of fleas jumping from location to location or from person to animal to things like that. There was like a common thread and paralleling with migration again, and to see this as beneficial. Um, with looking at parasites which are beneficial for the body, it's with how migration is good for the new environment or the hosting environment. So it's treated in that way. This is just another image of some diagrams that were kind of made throughout this piece of work. Um, and it's just a vinyl, really. I mean, it's just like a collection of diagrams, some repeated, some not. But yeah, this is really, there's certain ways that you can kind of translate your conversations or your observations into work. I think that can be quite slight. So here's another example. Okay. Um, I'm going to skip this. Okay, so sound pressure and value systems. Um, so sound pressure is really key as part of the work because it's how you interact. It's like the sonic culture of a space can be dictated by the kind of speaker that you've got, or the kind of sound, or the kind of instruction, or the kind of voice that is talking. So sound pressure is really important as like a method or as like an idea to run through the work, to run through some of this work. Um, So things like sounds of, warning sounds or chimes or chirps or certain kinds of noise. These are all parts of ways of thinking about sound pressure or how sound can manipulate or influence or create a dialogue with your body or a group of people. And I'm thinking about certain kinds of public address speakers that are used in kind of border zones. Certain kind of environments, such as speakers used for airports, or there's lots of kinds of specific speakers that I've done a lot of research into, and it can seem quite specific and maybe a bit overly complicated in this sense, but it's really important to associate, for me, the value of what I'm discussing, which is quite sensitive material, with the kind of speaker that I'm focused on, with the kind of voice that is being said through the speaker, and maybe the unexpected voice through those kinds of speakers as well. So this is just an example of quite an old piece of work now, and it was taken from the train lines, the kind of the train announcement kind of running um, text you might see on like a UK train or like a train station. So I was kind of thinking about kind of this idea of replicating something that exists already and yeah, recontextualizing it. So something quite slight again. So just to give a trigger warning for language used to describe migrants, um, this is something that I come back to quite often because language is so important as part of the work. And it's something that's quite inescapable and unavoidable as well. Um, so there's a series of words at the bottom there that have been used to describe migrants, and I do this framing of migrants and parasites as a metaphor runs throughout all of the work, pretty much. And me trying to prove that there are beneficial parasites, in the sense that there are beneficial migrants, of course, um, is it's kind of like really like personally embedded with my kind of my thinking and how I exist, and this kind of migrants and parasites runs through all of it pretty much. So I just wanted to highlight that this is really important, and yeah, I'll go into that a bit more, I think. Okay, so I've got some examples from different scripts, where so a lot of the writing turns into like a mass of maybe interviews that I've done with certain people that are really kind of important conversations, kind of research, some field research, archival material, all of that together, then forms into these kind of smaller performance lectures. So this is just one example. This is another example that I will talk through in a lecture without necessarily showing it, but it's something for me because it's just like a reminder or yeah. So this is another example. So to come back to what I was talking about with migrants and parasites, how metaphors are made is really key. So with a metaphor to function and to exist, there's a focus and a framing, which makes it quite, for example, migrants is the focus, parasites is the framing. So this is how I'm thinking through like media framing of language and how it ties back to all of this way of thinking through some of the other work and speakers and thinking through the different kinds of framing that exists. Here's an example of from the performance lecture for Fact Liverpool that was with Jess and Elodie. Um, so just some examples of some text. And oh yeah, so another example from a script, another a different script as well. There might be part of what you're thinking through where you have to test things out. And I was talking about that before with giving the manifesto to a bunch of artists, doctors, leech farming people, and all of that, um, as one way of testing things. But you can do things without needing a lot of material on you. There could be, you could describe it as a demo as well. So a demonstration is another way of testing things out. Um, for this specific lecture, I had some work that I'd made, so a series of springs, and I was demonstrating that with what I was talking through. Um, so you don't actually need a lot of objects, materials, things like that to do some of these kind of tests and demonstrations. There's a lot of kind of value in having that conversation and recording it in a certain way. That might be enough. And this was with a kind of like a large audience as well. And I asked someone to do the demonstration with me. Okay, so I've got some archival found examples of insect musicians. Um, it's not just um, it's not just it's not just books, kind of artists or kind of scientists that I'm pulling all this kind of material and this kind of research from or thinking through different methods of working. It's not all just from that, but um, I wanted to talk through some kind of archival found examples. So So musicians are um, musicians or music is a big part of the work, how it's kind of shifting a bit more recently anyway, but explicitly folk music is something that I'm interested in thinking through with this idea of kind of culture, kind of landscape, parasites, and the body. So this is a cockroach. It's an illustration or like a kind of like a drawing of one from 79. And there's something about making music about insects or making music for insects or parasites that I'm really interested in. And there's lots of kind of found examples or things that you can sample within your own work um, as well.
La cucaracha, ya no puede caminar.
Okay, so this is a this is a found example which might seem quite silly, but it's really important for thinking differently about what you would like to look at or research. This is quite a well-known song. Um, next slide. Okay, but what I wanted to focus on with this is that there is found material that is also part of different approaches to, observations that you could make or methodology. So this song, which is quite a popular song, it's about a cockroach, but it's about a cockroach who can't walk because it has missing legs, and it's actually a metaphor. So it's an insect metaphor, or like like an insect metaphor for helplessness. And I think this is something. It's like another way of thinking about sound or music or kind of folk narratives with already existing kind of propaganda or problems with how migrants are described as well, or as parasites. But this song or this folk song has been modified over time by groups of individuals. But it's in relation to the Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 20 and political events. And I think that's really key for me as well to situate political events or moments in time related to how migrants are described as parasites. It's happened throughout history. It's gone back to, thinking through in Nazi Germany, describing Jewish people as bacillus, which is bacteria. So there's ongoing issues where this lives within political events or histories. And I just wanted to mention that as this is like another way of kind of finding work, I guess, and what I find really important. Um, so this is organism and insect metaphor. So biology is allegory. I think that's also quite key. So poetics of the hive, insect metaphor and literature. Um, so the variety of insect metaphors issues from a dramatic tableau, one that defines the individual and society in relation to each other. So that's pretty much what I've been talking about. Another example that I won't play right now, but I can send after. Another example of how, you know, so this is an album by The Locust, which is a band. Um, but I think they're quite theatrical with how they do think about. So it's more like kind of like noise music, kind of 90s. Uh, they use things like Moogs and synths and things like that, analog Moogs, analog synths. This is also how I would see as part of the work. So what they do is they have these insect costumes, and they usually have these for live shows. And I find this to be like really relevant with thinking through, um, for example, a folk song as well as other works that I've shown as well. What kind of approaches to thinking about it. Um, I don't think I'll play the field recordings now. Don't have loads of time, but um, So this is a field recording of the water boatmen, and they used and then the recordings are made with hydrophones as well. So it's a different kind of pickup that you might have. And it's really interesting to think about what lives beneath the surface of the pond. Um, and what does that say in terms of society? So this is like another example of how to find things that hold meaning or how they can translate to what you're thinking through and what you're talking about with your specific idea. And another example, so this is from David Rottenberg from Secret Sounds of Ponds. And I can send this after as well. But there's something really interesting about thinking about the surface, beneath the surface, or, kind of with a border or with a boundary um, as well. So I'm just going to move on quite quickly to access to facilities. So I spoke about previously quite like a slow process to facilities or like access to labs and access to a specific kind of lab or series of labs or conversations. Those are all quite slow processes that I've had, but I wanted to use an example that was quite relevant for this, I think, with quite a quick process, like a fast process. And that is, and this is with Jess and Elodie as well for one of the A.MAL projects. And this is quite a quick way of gaining a lot of information, finding the right person to communicate with, and knowing what to look for when you go there. So there's lots of things such as you can always get to a site or get to a building or a location or this kind of conservatory or centre space, but not knowing what to do when you get there. And instead of thinking just about aesthetics, it's about what actually exists in that space, which is more important, or who is showing you around that can hold and that holds lots of kind of key information. Sorry. So it's about looking actively and knowing what to look for. So doing some research before you do this visit or do like a before you do a visit, asking the right questions as well. Um, asking about kind of behavior is always quite key. Behavior, um, culture, who's got access to these facilities, all these sorts of questions. And this could be for anything that you might be looking at. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that looks like this. Um, and asking what's in their fridges is also really important as well. That's where all the good stuff is. Especially if you're looking at labs, they a lot of really important things live in fridges. And you think it might be in like a bioreactor, or you think the most important thing in there might be an incubator, but it's not. It's what they keep in the fridge that they need to keep cold, because this is what they're researching and they're testing, and this is where lots of kind of conversation can come out from. So an example through microscope. Um, okay, so replicating through drawing, diagram, observation, and locality, all really key for this. And I've just got a quote that I kind of come back to about the work. It's like it's a bit of grounding, I think. There might be certain quotes or from or excerpts from books or articles or things you might be reading or watching or listening to that you come back to as a bit of grounding, especially because this sort of work is quite experimental, kind of, experimental medicine. It can feel quite chaotic, so I come back to this quite a lot, um, and I find it quite helpful to do that, especially with like a longer kind of series of this kind of longer body of work or this kind of slow process. It's good to have this kind of anchors to come back to. Another example of that. You might want to think so. You might want to think through this idea of an intervention as part of the work, and it's really key with anti-racist practice as well. This idea of intervening or intervention, or how I see it is how interruption as well. All these sorts of things are really important. So this is a roundtable discussion with a series of figureheads from different universities and colleges. And I just had some simple questions, really. So part of the preparation for this was to invite a small group of people from the public, like a public audience, who were there to take part but not to observe. So this is kind of different from what I was talking about before with observations, with looking and part of the other work. This is about active engagement, and everyone in the room has to take part. And that's what, everyone has something at stake in the room. And that's what's really key for this different kind of working. So this is a roundtable discussion. Questions were things like, are there beneficial parasites for the body? To come back to that. Um, and yeah, this went on for about 2 hours. And it was a really kind of nice, like, space in Shoreditch in London. And these key people who are invited for the roundtable discussion or this kind of forum, there might be something that you want to think about as a forum, where everyone is active and engaging in that space. Um, there's a lot of kind of improvisation as well within these spaces, and that's also really good. So things can fall out of the conversation which you think are actually better than what you set up in the first place. So there's nothing wrong with that happening either. So I think I'm near the end. So diagramming and finding reason with drawing. A lot of the drawings and diagrams, this is quite like this is this is a nicer version of what all the shit drawings look like to start off with, because I don't have that much time and I have to be quite quick. But it's just how I kind of, like mapping interactions is really key for parasites, and this idea of mapping or um spatially what that does, how that inhabits a space. If it is just drawing, that is also really key as part of your methods as well. So I find it really important. Another example, um, so this initially was, a, so thinking through this initially was a plain diagram, but it turned into this projection. So this projection was a way of me kind of looking at diagrams physically within a space. And it was, yeah, it was rendered it in this certain way. It kind of has a certain feel to it as well. The color palette is still the same. All these kind of controls are still the same. And this is a very kind of simple way that I've thought about this kind of physicality of parasites within a space. This was made with a plasma cutter. So I plasma cut some sheet metal in the shape of like it's quite illustrative of this parasite, and that comes back to all the early diagrams and drawings I did beforehand. I think that's the last one. There's just some just some small samples that I've got here that I like coming back to and I think are really important. And I do look at quite a lot of these through like a very small magnifier as well, and a lot of kind of new drawings are done. This is more kind of studio work in that sense. Kind of my observations that I'm having and making, and these are from a lab in Kent. So I've got these from there.